New claims the wife of the Orlando killer, Omar Mateen, knew he wanted to attack the Pulse Club and had dropped him off there on one of several earlier visits, and suggestions he was gay or bisexual himself.
And if we fall into the trap of painting all Muslims with a broad brush and imply that we are at war with an entire religion, then we are doing the terrorist work for them.
Good evening from Orlando, where that extraordinarily angry attack by the president on the anti-Muslim rhetoric of Donald Trump comes amid striking new developments on the massacre here at the Pulse Club. It's being reported the killer's wife has told the FBI she tried to talk him out of the attack and drove him to the club on an earlier visit. We've spoken to his father, who says he shouldn't have been able to buy the guns. It's also being claimed Omar Mateen went to the gay club several times and he was using gay dating apps. And we've heard the first moving testimony from those rushed into hospital with terrible injuries.
He's shooting everyone that's already dead on the floor, making sure they're dead. I can hear the shotguns closer, and I look over and he shoots the girl next to me.
And we are live in Poland, where they are holding their breath over Brexit. Not least because an estimated 1 million Poles would not be working and living in the UK if it weren't for the European Union. And if the Euros were supposed to provide welcome distraction from all the anguish over the referendum, well, that's not happening. Russia is fined and given a suspended ban because of the behaviour of its fans.
And I'm at a pub in Southampton where regulars sometimes find themselves propping up the bar with Polish migrants who have, like thousands for centuries before them, made this city their home. We've been to a hospital here where more than 1,000 EU migrants work, as the Labour leader warns the NHS can't afford to lose them. And from Brexit to bricks, 168,000 of them. The world's most popular modern art museum opens a 10-storey extension this week with performance art at its heart. So it'd be rude not to. I've been climbing into bed with an artist. It's all got terribly out of hand.
Well, here in Orlando, new facts are emerging about the man behind the Pulse nightclub massacre. Omar Mateen's wife has told agents she tried to talk him out of carrying out the attack, admitting she'd been with him when he bought a gun and drove him to the club to check it out. Officials are also investigating reports that Mateen had been a regular visitor to the club, describing the massacre as a possible self-hate crime. I've been down to the hospital here to hear the powerful testimony of one man who survived the attack.
Out of nowhere, we just hear a big shotgun. We stop what we're doing, and then it just keeps going. That happened, and we just grabbed each other. We started running, and unfortunately, I was shot about 3 times in my leg. So by this time, I couldn't walk at all. He's shooting everyone that's already dead on the floor, making sure they're dead. And I can hear the shotguns closer, and I look over and he shoots the girl next to me. And I'm just there laying down. I'm thinking, I'm next, I'm dead. So I don't know how, but by the glory of God, he shoots towards my head, but it hits my hand. And then he shoots me again, and it hits the side of my hip. I had no reaction. I was just prepared to just stay there, laying down, so he won't know that I'm alive. By this time, he goes up to the front, and I think that's when he's battling against the cops. I just hear shotguns going all over the place. And I'm looking up, and some cops, he grabs my hand, and he's like, "This is the only way that I can take you out." I'm like, "Please carry me, because I'm in pain right now." Couldn't walk or anything. So he starts to drag me out across the street, and I look over, and there's just bodies everywhere. We're all in pain. And we were able to get to the ambulance. They brought us over here, and the way that you guys have taken care of us in this hospital is amazing.
What is your message to the political leaders who are now engaged in an argument over whether restricting guns would help prevent these sorts of things happening?
I really do think in order to have a gun, you have to have a reason. I don't think you should just have a gun just to have a gun. I mean, I believe in protecting yourself and all that, but if it's that easy to just bring 2 guns huge guns like that into this place that easy, there's something wrong.
Well, Omar Mateen's wife has now become a key focus of the investigation. Our Washington correspondent Kylie Morris is with me. What is the latest?
Well, Krishnan, we're hearing that the focus now really is on how much Noor Mateen actually knew. This is his 30-year-old second wife. If it's proven that she had prior knowledge, she could well face charges herself. Apparently what she has told FBI investigators is that she has driven him to the Pulse nightclub before and that she tried to talk him out of carrying out this attack. Also some suggestion, as you mentioned, that she may have been with him when he went to purchase these firearms. Now locally as well, more detail emerging about speculation over his own sexuality, over Mateen's sexuality. It seems he was a known figure here within the gay community, certainly for some people who went regularly to the Pulse nightclub. And also he was posting himself, it seems, on gay dating websites. Noor Mateen, the 30-year-old wife of gunman Omar, is swiftly becoming the key focus for investigators. Neighbours would regularly see the couple with their 3-year-old son outside the complex where they lived in the tropical suburbs of Florida's east coast. Officers have been searching their townhouse for physical evidence. But back in Orlando, detail was emerging of another hidden life and revelations that Mateen used gay dating apps.
He clearly had his picture open on Adam for Adam. He's had his picture up on Grindr. In Jacked, he had his pictures up on there.
Cord Cedeno told MSNBC Mateen had approached him online.
I recognized him from one of the apps, but I instantly blocked him because he was very creepy in his messages, and I blocked him immediately.
Others say the night he wrought such violence was far from his first inside the Pulse nightclub. In fact, he'd been there dozens of times. I asked his father what he knew. They say that he was known inside that club, that he had conversations with them about you, and that he would sometimes sit in the corner, sometimes he would become belligerent and angry and leave the club.
Even I didn't know about this. So why he went there and why did he do shooting there? And I'm not aware of at all. And I wish I did know his intention. I could have stopped him.
His father is hoarse from speaking about his son and the massacre he carried out with a handgun and a semi-automatic rifle. What kind of guidance did you give him with regard to people who are gay?
Well, he wasn't talking about anything of that. So there was one single incident that we went through in Miami, and that's about it.
So in Miami, you've said that your son saw two men kissing and he was shocked by that.
It wasn't shock, just a normal reaction that anybody else can show.
What's the normal reaction?
Just seeing two guys in front of the bunch of kids and women kissing each other. So they could have picked another spot, I guess, but shocked everybody there.
Do you think there's anything wrong with two men kissing one another in public?
I have no problem, no issue in that one.
You've said in a statement that it is up to Allah whether or not anyone should be punished for their homosexuality.
No, what I meant was it was wrong translation. What I meant that no human being can judge about another human being.
Does homosexuality require punishment?
That's not up to me, it's up to God.
But rather than divine intervention, Mr. Mateen argues club security should have intervened to stop the massacre.
The security should have acted better, that was his job. So if...
Should he have killed your son?
Yeah, because anybody does breaks the law, that person's intention is to kill other people, they should be killed. Doesn't matter who.
Some would say a better protection would have been if your son wasn't able to get a gun himself.
He was a security officer, he had the gun permit, they gave him a gun, legally.
But he had been investigated twice by the FBI. I know it doesn't break any laws, but do you think it was right and just that he was able to get a semi-automatic weapon designed to cause maximum damage?
I don't. I'm anti-gun. I'm against anybody getting a gun.
But this is Florida, where gun rights are unassailable.
Unfortunately, he's evil. We happen to be the gun store he picked.
A former New York City policeman, Mr. Henson, says all legal checks were performed before Mateen took possession of his weapons lawfully.
An evil person came in here and they legally purchased 2 firearms from us. And if he hadn't purchased them from us, I'm sure he would have gotten them from another local gun store in the area.
And that in itself is just one reason why in Washington an angry President Obama called again, as he has so many times before, for a ban on semi-automatic weapons.
Enough talking about being tough on terrorism. Actually be tough on terrorism and stop making it easy as possible for terrorists to buy assault weapons. Reinstate the assault weapons ban. Make it harder for terrorists to use these weapons to kill us. Otherwise, these kinds of events are going to keep on happening.
Well, within the last few minutes, other victims at the hospital have been telling their stories. One survivor describes the moment the gunman made a call from the bathroom.
And he actually made a call to 911 from in there. Everybody could hear who was in the bathroom who survived, could hear him talking to 911, saying that the reason why he's doing this is because he wants America to stop bombing his country. And from that conversation from 911, he pledged his allegiance to ISIS. He even spoke to us directly in the bathroom. He said, "Are there any black people in here?" I was too afraid to answer, but there was an African-American male in the stall where most of my body was, majority of my body was, had answered. And he said, "Yes, there are about 6 or 7 of us." And the gunman responded back to him saying that, "You know, I don't have a problem with black people. This is about my country. You guys suffered enough." And he made a statement saying that it wasn't about black people. This isn't the reason why he was doing this.
Well, with me now is Nadine Smith, the CEO of the gay rights organization Equality Florida, and the Democrat state senator Geraldine Thompson. Nadine, at the vigil last night, one of the biggest cheers came when a Muslim preacher called for a ban on assault weapons and new gun controls. Is this country really making any progress on that front, given this is a call that happens every time there is one of these incidents?
I'm glad that in the wake of this tragedy, there is a renewed, invigorated call for not allowing weapons of mass slaughter to be readily available to basically anyone. These are weapons of war. There are law enforcement officers, some of them combat veterans who had never seen the kind of carnage that was unleashed at that nightclub. And we have to do something. My neighbor shouldn't be able to have a nuclear weapon just because of the Second Amendment. My neighbor should not be able to fire off 700 rounds in a matter of moments. So when you allow a ideology of hatred toward LGBT people or anyone, the lack of mental health services to be combined with easy access to weapons of mass slaughter, you get what we've got here in Orlando.
What about these questions around Mateen's sexuality? Does it make any difference whether he was gay or bisexual or confused?
You know, every time one of these things happens, there's a lot of speculation. We don't know whether his pledge to ISIS is really just a dramatic flair that he added to this dangerous, path he was on. I'm not going to speculate about his sexual orientation. What I do know is he grew up in a culture that told him that lesbian, gay, bisexual, and transgender people don't have the right to live as equals. And whether he directed that message internally to what may have been true of him, or whether he only pointed it externally in the tragic events of Sunday, it doesn't matter. It all was fed from that same well of hatred.
I mean, do you recognize this phrase, self-hate crime? Hate crime's a hate crime, isn't it?
It is, and we have to uproot the hatred, whether it's directed internally or directed externally. And I know that there are a lot of politicians standing in front of microphones right now saying very important words about gun control, but those of us who want to memorialize those who have died have to turn those words into action.
Well, Senator, your president has just made a remarkable speech, really attacking Donald Trump head on tonight over his rhetoric on Muslims and immigrants, calling him a politician who uses Twitter and saying he's doing the terrorist work for them.
Well, I think people who would be leaders in this country have to be very careful about the rhetoric that they spout. And Donald Trump has been encouraging people to act on their hate. and whether their hatred is directed toward people based on their sexual orientation, or as we saw about a year ago in Charleston, South Carolina, based on their race. People now feel that they have a license to act on the hate that they feel. Today I'm wearing orange. I wore orange yesterday in solidarity with people who want to see the end of gun violence in America.
But isn't the truth that despite amazing rhetoric and tears and memorable speeches, this president has been unable to achieve anything on gun control?
Well, he has had obstruction and opposition from Congress, from the United States Senate. They won't even confirm the person that he has nominated to the United States Supreme Court. So there has been obstruction all along the way. And we need to change Congress. We need people in Congress who understand that based on the fact that guns are so readily available, we're going to continue to see this over and over again.
But isn't again, I mean, the truth that there's a good chance Donald Trump will get a boost from this? There are lots of people who like what he's saying.
There are people who like what he's saying, but then there are others of us who disagree vehemently with what he's saying, and we're standing together to call on Congress. And as we enter the election season, we're saying to politicians, if you want to be a leader in this country, we're going to hold you accountable for your position on gun reform, and we're going to vote according to that. And we have seen people coming together, and last night at the vigil, almost every speaker called for reform with regard to access to guns in this country.
Do you think more progress might be made on hate towards your community?
You know, when you look at who was at the vigil last night, who stood shoulder to shoulder, quite literally, in denouncing what happened, there were people who'd never raised their voices before to confront hostility toward the LGBT community. I'm heartened by that. And, you know, as for gun control, reasonable, responsible gun control, the burden falls not simply on the president, but on every single American. We can't wait till each of our lives is touched by gun violence to understand that this is not normal. This is not okay. This is not acceptable in a free society.
Nadine, Senator Thompson, thank you both very much indeed.
You're very welcome.
Thank you
for joining us. Well, we'll be back later, but for now, over to Matt Fry, who is in the Polish capital, Warsaw.
Welcome to Warsaw, the capital of Poland, where the sun is setting and storm clouds are gathering. Now here they rather like the European Union, and not surprisingly, because since 2004, when they joined, the economy has by and large prospered, and they've still managed to send an estimated 1 million of their citizens to live and work in Britain. More on that in a moment. But in Britain itself, opinion seems to be heading in the opposite direction, towards the exit, if a recent set of opinion polls are to be believed. And even Euro 2016, which is supposed to be a welcome distraction from it all, may be having an impact on proceedings. Now, the Russian Football Federation has been sanctioned, they have been fined, they have been warned that they might be banned altogether if the bad behavior of some of their fans continues, and there is indeed a worry that there might be more clashes on their way as we approach the England-Wales game later this week. From the city of Lille, here's our sports reporter, Kemi Nzera.
Sick gloating that should turn the stomach of anyone who claims to be a football fan. Edited to a thumping soundtrack, Russian hooligans rampaging through Marseille. Uploaded to the internet as entertainment. The kicking of 51-year-old Brit Andrew Bash into a life-threatening coma. These men wearing Oriole Butchers t-shirts didn't want their faces to be shown because they said they too were hooligans. Said they'd just arrived from Marseille and it was all the fault of the English. In this parallel universe of hooligan culture, they told me it was England fans who first stole their flags. It was them, they said, who were provoked. All they did was respond. This morning, French police deported a coachload of Russians suspected of involvement with the violence. UEFA have said any more, and the team will be sent home too. Russia's next game is in Lille, where their fan volunteers say they're as disgusted as everyone else.
Do the hooligans, do they care? Has that message got through to them?
Well, to be honest, I don't want to be responsible for those people who are are doing these bad things, because it's even sometimes hard to say that they're really football fans, you know.
Het is nu dus al rustig hier.
But round and round it goes, from outright hooliganism to vulgar drunkenness. In the last hour, Lille town centre, what appeared to be men wearing England shirts. Little wonder the extra police. England play a few miles up the road on Thursday against Wales.
It just piles more pressure on what was meant to be a football tournament, Euro 2016. Because France has been under a state of emergency now since last November. And as well as the risk of hooliganism, the very real threat, as we saw last night, of another act of terrorism.
An attack apparently inspired by ISIS. A police officer and his partner killed, their 3-year-old son taken hostage but surviving. The assailant reportedly under investigation for jihadist-related activities. 25-year-old La Rosia Bala, who'd already spent 2 years in jail for trying to recruit fighters to go to Pakistan. This was supposed to be a festival of football, but instead it is violence that threatens to define this summer in France. Kami Enzerum, Channel 4 News, Lille.
Now, a football manager might call it squeaky bum time for the Remain campaign, because there's been a clutch of opinion polls over the referendum indicating that Leave now has the edge. And there's a bit of panic in the Remain campaign. For one thing, they've asked the Labour Party, especially the Labour leader Jeremy Corbyn, to get more involved in getting out the vote as we approach the final week of any campaigning. Now, Nigel Farage would say that the reason why those polls have edged forward is because Michael Gove and Boris Johnson are finally talking about the thing that he's always cared about so much, and that is controlling immigration. Here's our political editor, Gary Gibbon.
The Prime Minister held himself back again today, leaving the stage to Labour. The party's support for Remain hasn't reached many of its natural supporters, and even where it has, they haven't always paid much attention.
This is the Labour movement saying that we are voting to remain in the European Union next week. We're saying that because we want to defend the very many gains that we've made by trade unions across Europe that have brought us better working conditions, longer holidays, less discrimination, and maternity and paternity leave. Thank you very much.
Remain needs Labour voters to help it over the line, and right now it thinks it hasn't got enough of them. Swathes of Labour's traditional white working class vote are backing Leave. Some Labour MPs report struggling to get Labour supporting public sector workers to back Remain, and more middle class supporters too. Jeremy Corbyn warned, don't trust Vote Leave's offer to put money saved from the EU into the NHS. Boris Johnson and co, he said, were wolves in sheep's clothing. This man might think they're wearing his political clothes. Nigel Farage wanted a campaign focused on immigration. It was rubbished by the official campaign backed by Tory ministers like Michael Gove and former Mayor of London Boris Johnson. They've now adopted his Australian point system policy for immigration and put the subject centre stage.
I felt that when Boris Johnson, Michael Gove and then Frank Field started to talk about a points-based system for immigration, about drastic reductions of numbers, I thought, well, thank you very much. I thought then, well, this is the, I've been singing this song for a long time, but it's been quite a lonely place to be.
Well, I was going to ask you about that. I mean, right, we don't have to go far back, and the people who are running the official campaign now are a bit sniffy about you, your ideas, your approach, focusing on immigration, and they're all there now, aren't they? This is your strategy.
Completely my strategy, and the fact they've decided to follow it, I couldn't be happier.
So are Michael Gove and Boris Johnson your kind of politicians?
Well, they're backing the right side in this referendum. They've put their political necks on the line to do it.
And they're doing it your way?
Couldn't be better.
And that must mean, mustn't it, that if we have a change of Prime Minister after a Brexit vote, all hypothetical at the moment, but it looks pretty likely that's what would happen if there was a Brexit vote. Yeah. It's those guys potentially at the top in some way. Agreed?
It looks like it,
And
yes.
what sort of relationship would you have with them?
I don't know. Look, I've spent 25 years...
But they've grown closer to you, haven't they? They're much closer to you than you ever imagined
I
possible.
completely get that.
You always make a big thing of being a very straight politician. British people might want to know what is the other side of the door.
Yeah.
And, as you said, it could be
I'll
those
be
two in power and a different relationship between a Conservative Party that one of those two ran and your party.
Well, I'll be honest with the British public, I haven't got a clue.
Oh, but you've got a bit of an inkling. You're just saying they're on your page.
I've got...
It's not the same. This isn't David Cameron's party, is it? This would be a different party.
Oh, it could be a very different party. And
Closer to you in your way of thinking.
It may well be. And who knows?
And they could be running the country.
And who knows? They may start talking about all sorts of things that we've been campaigning for. I don't know.
The Chancellor was doing some low-key campaigning in Gloucestershire this morning. The Prime Minister, much the same in Suffolk. Both are itching to get back the microphone from Labour and shout their central economic message. Today, their aides pointed out that the value of the top FTSE 100 firms dropped £30 billion on fears, they said, of what's to come if the poll lead for Brexit is delivered next week.
Now, if there's one country watching the referendum more closely than perhaps any other in the EU, it is this one, Poland. Why? Because 1 million of their citizens, an estimated 1 million, are working and living in Britain and have been doing so since 2004 when Poland joined. They're working there as nurses, as doctors, construction workers, plumbers. They are very much part of our community. But they're also afraid, as the biggest group of EU migrants in Britain, that if we were to vote for Brexit, this might have an adverse effect on them. They simply don't know at this moment what the future will hold. And then there are other worries. There's a fear that if we were to vote for Brexit, there might be a domino effect that could eventually lead to the unravelling of the whole EU project. As I've been finding out in the southeastern corner of this country, close to the Ukrainian border. In a field in eastern Poland that was home 4 years ago to turnips, radishes and cabbages, there is now an airport. It was financed in large part by money from Brussels. It services the region of Lublin, one of Europe's poorest. And this futuristic slab is the beginning of the all-important Lublin-Luton air bridge. Almost every passenger on this, the 1215 from Luton, is a Pole living and working in the UK. The flights are packed. The crew don't even bother with announcements in English. And even the arrivals board would make a Eurosceptic wince. But for the local economy, Britain is a lifeline.
260,000 passengers in the airport. This year it's going to be about 400,000. And
how many of those are flying to the UK?
75% are to UK.
75%?
Yes, 75%.
So on every level for you, Brexit is a nightmare?
It's a nightmare, and this is very bad, not only for airports, it's a very bad for whole region and for whole Poland, actually.
In the nearby village of Nowy Gaj, with its bucolic charms, there is a frequent flyer from the airport who wants us to see the dream house he bought for £60,000.
We want this, flooring heating in here, and the big windows, which I already imagine is really nice.
An IT expert who speaks 4 European languages fluently, Michał embodies a new breed of Euro citizen. He used to live in Portsmouth, where he worked for the freight company that still employs him. Except now he gets to work next to his wife on his laptop from his kitchen, and his existence wouldn't be possible without the internet and the EU. But you're having the best of both worlds, and I don't mean that in a vindictive way, but you are having the best of both worlds. You're getting British salaries for a much cheaper life in Poland.
Yes, we may say that. Yes, I'm the fruit, let's say, of this opening the EU onto the new countries.
Before you get too jealous, it's worth pointing out that Michał probably wouldn't have come back to live here if EU money hadn't built new airports, roads, and a few other things.
So what's this? Yeah, it's just for people taking the rest. If you walk.
Does anyone ever use it?
Yes, of course.
And that too is subsidised by the EU.
Yes.
Okay. And so was this, the new art centre in Lublin, completed in January, 3/4 of it funded by EU money, waiting to become the beating cultural heart of the region. Now, when it comes to attitudes towards the EU cake, people here in Lublin are, to coin a phrase, very much pro-having it and pro-eating it. And you can see why. The European Union doesn't just guarantee democracy and freedom of speech and rule of law, it funnels tons of money into places like this And of course, all the excess labour that can't find jobs here goes off to places like Britain or elsewhere in the European Union. So they are really afraid that if Britain were to leave the EU, it might start some kind of unravelling. Amazing. All they need now are a few visitors. And although they've benefited hugely from EU cash, there is so much more at stake for them here in eastern Poland. Do you think that the British are mad to want to leave the European Union?
Well, I'm not a doctor of medicine, so I would definitely not call anybody mad, but it's a very curious thought, a very puzzling thought for a Polish person.
If it happened, I worry about the EU, the whole EU, because this is a very difficult project. European Union. Here in Lublin, we have a first model of European Union.
So if you buy onto the whole EU idea, well then Lublin can be seen as a shining example of its success. And if you don't, it ticks all the Eurosceptic boxes. Off to Warsaw on the train, journey time 2 hours. We're in first class, the cost of the ticket 10 quid. Now none of that would be possible without EU funds. Here the EU is still a no-brainer, even though the fiercely patriotic Law and Justice Party, now in government, is beginning to bristle at political interference from Brussels. However, in the presidential palace, the message was clear.
I believe many British citizens do not realize to what extent Poles, but also Slovaks, Bulgarians, Romanians, have contributed to the British economy over the last 2-3 decades. You need them, you really do. But we are happy with the European Union. We are happy being members of this organization. I hope it will never unravel. I hope we will always be members of this organization because it's good for Poland, for the Polish economy, for the Polish society.
And your plea to the people of Britain as they prepare to go to the polls?
Choose wisely.
But in this referendum, one man's wisdom is another man's folly. And from Warsaw to Madrid, everyone is holding their breath over Britain. I think the best way to sum it up is this. If you buy into the idea of the European Union, then the Polish example is a successful case in point. But if you don't, you really won't like much of what I've just been showing you. And there's one other consideration here in Warsaw. Russia, the big neighbor to the east. They're afraid of Russia. They were ruled by Russia until a quarter of a century ago. They're more afraid of Russia now than they have been for the last 25 years. The more Vladimir Putin wants the European Union to unravel, the more here they want the opposite. On that note, back to you, Kathy, in Southampton.
Well, thanks, Matt. And some of the Poles you've been talking to might just find their way here to Southampton. But as well as having a sizable Polish population, it's exactly the kind of city where Labour is trying to persuade voters to back the Remain cause. Today, Jeremy Corbyn warned that Brexit would trigger such massive public spending cuts, it would put the National Health Service at risk. So are European nationals putting the NHS under unsustainable pressure or propping it up by staffing our hospitals? We'll be trying to nail down the facts behind those claims in a moment. But first, our health and social affairs correspondent Victoria MacDonald has been to the city's hospital to find out what patients and staff think.
Every week we give £350 million to Brussels.
The worst thing we could do for our NHS is to wreck our economy by taking ourselves out of the single market.
Free movement on that scale will have huge consequences for the NHS.
You're more likely to come across a migrant caring for you in a hospital than in the bed next to you.
The NHS, it's the emotional part of the referendum debate, with fears raised by both sides over safety, staffing, cancer treatments and immigrants. Jeremy Corbyn used it today in his message to wavering Labour voters.
If, like us, you care about our health service, then listen to the dedicated staff here today. Dedicated to the NHS and dedicated to remaining part of Europe.
Southampton is a port city. Centuries of migrants from across the world have arrived here and sometimes stayed. 7 to 10% of the population is from the EU. Its main hospital, Southampton General, doesn't know how many migrants use their services, but of 11,000 staff, 1,047 are from the European Union, twice the national average. What the debate boils down to is, on the one side, the claim that hospitals like Southampton are being put under further pressure by EU migrants, that they're taking up the beds, that they're using the accident and emergency units. On the other side, the claim is that the NHS is being propped up by EU migrants, that they are coming here to work as doctors and nurses and care assistants. So what do patients and visitors here think?
At the moment we need to help. We need the migrants who are working in the health service.
Are you in or out?
I'm out.
So who's going to prop up the health service then?
There's nothing stopping them working here.
You've just been in here for your seventh baby.
Yeah.
Who was on shift helping with the baby?
There's a mixed bag actually. There was a West Indian woman who's the our midwife. There was English. There was some Eastern European girls in there as well. Yeah, so it was a mixture.
The Southampton suburb of Shirley, home to many Polish migrants. In her newly opened restaurant, I asked co-owner Małwina Frasek whether she uses the NHS. Not much, she says. It's too difficult to get appointments. So do you think that the health service in Poland is better?
Much better, much better. That's why so many times I use the private clinic, because here, from my point, the services here is not good.
Controversial indeed, though not as controversial as the Brexit claim that we send £350 million to the EU each week. A claim that so incensed the chair of the Health Select Committee, she even changed sides.
They should be using truthful data. This is a gross figure. It doesn't take account of the rebate. It doesn't take account of the amount that they have already pledged if they are successful to keep giving to farmers, scientists and so forth.
This is a debate heavy on figures and heavy on the interpretation of those figures. At St George's Medical School, Professor Gus Dalgleish came armed with this weighty tome filled, he says, with all the evidence on why we should leave.
The NHS is being imposed upon by European directives. It's being made less and less efficient, and it's been given more and more to do indirectly by the open borders policy. And you know, the thing is that people are very frightened that if we were to get out, we wouldn't be able to have doctors from Europe and nurses. This is absolute rubbish. We would be able to have anybody we need who's qualified, and we've got a job vacancy.
The Remain arguments from his colleague, the equally eminent Professor Sanjeev Krishna, are on the other hand contained in just a few pages.
We put in 5.4 billion into research funding in the European Union under the Horizon 2020 programme. We get out 8.8 billion. We are leading in the world as a European Union when it comes to outputs. We compete with America very favourably and China. And I can tell you that the mood would be very, very grim if that was to be jeopardised.
At the heart of this debate is the flow in and the flow out of migrants and of the money between the EU and the NHS, with both sides claiming they will provide the lifeline to keep the health service safe.
Well, claims that EU health tourism puts a strain on the NHS strikes a chord with many people. Vote Leave say that Britain is shelling out billions on the healthcare of Britons in the EU, but getting very little back from European residents who come over here and use the NHS. Our fact-check team have been asking if that claim is true, with the full story behind the headline figures. Is EU health tourism costing Britain billions? If you need medical treatment in another EU member state, their health service can claim the cost back from your home country. So UK taxpayers foot the bill for British residents who get ill abroad, whilst EU visitors and recent migrants should not be a drain on the NHS. But Vote Leave says the system isn't working for Britain. They say the NHS has paid out £6 billion since 2008 to health services in other EU states for the treatment of British patients, while Britain has only claimed back about £400 million for the treatment of EU tourists and migrants here. The numbers are accurate, but is it the full story? Are British people who live in Europe more likely to need medical treatment? Government figures suggest that British people moving abroad are more likely to be pensioners, and over 65s cost the NHS almost double the average. The 4 countries which claim back the most money for British expat healthcare are the same 4 countries which have the largest number of British people claiming their pensions abroad. Recent migrants who come to the UK tend to be healthier and younger than the British population. New arrivals use hospitals half as much as British people. And there could be another reason. The NHS isn't very good at claiming back the money it's owed. In 2013 to 14, an estimated £240 million could have been recovered from EU countries. The NHS only managed to claim back £50 million, less than a quarter. Well, I'm joined here by some Southampton voters to see what they think about the EU, and regulars at the Waterloo Arms here. Lauren McCallan, let's come to you first. You want to vote out, I think. Yes. But are you not worried by Jeremy Corbyn saying today that if you vote out, then there'll be public spending cuts and that would trigger a crisis in the NHS?
Well, I feel like immigration is a higher problem at the moment, and when, obviously, the more people that are coming in, then they'll, maybe if they have like a good reputation of going into doctors and becoming surgeons and stuff, then going into the NHS, then they should bump up the risk as well, really. So I think it all comes back to immigration in the end.
So that's your bigger concern. Well, Clem, what about you? I mean, doesn't that sway you that there's lots of EU migrants using the NHS? Is that a burden on the public services?
Well, I think either way, when you see the burden, is that a lot of them work for the NHS as well, a lot of the migrants. So
52,000, I think, work for the NHS.
Well, I don't exactly know the figures, but also at the same time, I think it's important to realise that the biggest thing with staying in the EU is that I don't think it's so much of a thing with the NHS, it's we should stay within them because we're all thinking as one community.
Right, so it's about keeping the peace at the end of the day. But I mean, just coming back to this point on immigration, a lot of EU migrants, I think it is 52,000, work in the NHS. They actually contribute more in tax than they take out in benefits and in use of healthcare. Doesn't that sway you at all?
Well, with the NHS, obviously, if people are really good, like I said, as a surgeon, or they have a really good background and they want to come into the NHS, then that's fine. But you also have more people as well saying that they don't pay taxes and they're just coming in for the wrong reasons, and that's where like our taxes are going wrong and the NHS is going wrong, and then we've also got people coming in attacking and stuff like that, and it's just a really unsafe environment at the moment.
Well, Clem, you're a Labour voter, I think I'm right in saying.
I think the NHS won't survive, whether we're in or out of the EU. I think currently under the government Conservatives, we're going to end up losing the NHS, whether we're in or out. It's going to end up, they're going to have an uphill struggle to survive.
But as a Labour voter, do you think the Labour leadership should have been more honest about immigration and done more talking about immigration?
Done more talking as well, but also when you're watching it on the news, I mean, it's hard to know whether the facts and figures are completely correct. So it's a lot of research that you have to do, and a lot of us don't have this sort of time on our hands to see that happen.
Well, let me go and talk to 2 undecided voters now, because Jan and David Brown, I know you sympathise with that last point, that there's a lot of information, but a lot of politicians arguing with each other as well. So, Jan, what's leaving you undecided?
Well, up to Friday I was 100% out, but over the weekend when they've been talking about pensions and things like that, I don't know now. I need more information for the next
You're wavering.
week, yes.
What about the NHS, though? Does that bother you? Does what Jeremy Corbyn's saying today, that, you know, you're risking the NHS if you go for Brexit, if you vote to leave the EU?
I don't think so, because you will always need trained nurses, doctors, and they'll still come to our country to to work regardless whether we're out or in.
It might be a little bit more difficult. But David, what about immigration then? I mean, this is something that Vote Leave has been talking about a lot in the last few weeks.
Well, it depends if we can afford the capacity for skilled workers, skilled labour, to come in and fill the gaps that the British people can't provide. That's fine. I've worked abroad and I supplied them with labour that they didn't have on a 3-month contract, and then I returned home.
Well, look, that's all we've got time for, but thank you all in the pub here at the Waterloo Arms. That's really good to hear your views. After the break, we'll have more from Orlando. We hear from more of those who survived the Pulse nightclub attack, plus the postmodern Tate Modern. We take a look inside Switch House, the museum's vast new extension which gives space to more diverse and more international art. Welcome back. Now, when it opened on the cusp of the new millennium, London's Tate Modern expected 2 million visitors a year. But within a year, that had become 5 million, the world's most popular museum of modern and contemporary art. To make room for everyone, it's now built a vast new extension, the Switch House, designed by architects Herzog and de Meuron, and named after the power station which occupied the building before. As well as displaying more art, it'll also give house room to more diverse international artists. So I've been to have a look before it opens to the public this Friday. A towering ziggurat, a contemporary temple for the veneration of modern art. This is the Tate Modern's new extension, all 10 stories of it. So vast, the gallery hasn't quite finished raising the £260 million it all cost. Its first female director, Frances Morris, says the new space will give her the chance to put very different art on show. Less white, less male.
Well, of course, we have addressed the gender balance, and the collection and art history is full of great women who have been overlooked, but it's full of art from other parts of the world that's been overlooked from the point of view of London and the Western canon. So artists from Africa, from the Middle East, from Asia, in dialogue with more familiar practices from the UK, from Europe and North America.
And it's the first museum that's going to be devoted or have a particular space devoted to live art. What does that actually mean in practice?
Well, the whole of our ground floor, the old oil tank spaces, the Transformer galleries, are devoted to art that exists in the moment that you experience it. So performance art, real people, enacting work in real space.
It's that sense of that art's an invitation to think about the world in a different way. That's the magical thing, I think, about this new building, really. It's a really infinite sort of space, isn't it?
Artist Patrick Brill, better known as Bob and Roberta Smith, agrees to give me a magical mystery tour of the gallery and its contents.
And as you say, it is as if it's infinite.
The great visual thing about it is that you can't work out what plane anything's in after a while. So Shouker is this Lebanese artist. She's 100 this week. Wow. And this piece, which is taking an idea about abstraction, but actually looking at it in an architectural way. Absolutely beautiful piece of work. And I think that's one of the real ambitions of this of Tate Modern, this new opening out of Tate Modern, is to look at artists from around the world and try and put together the story of art around the world. This is a great piece. This is David Madala. David Madala was actually right in the centre of this kind of movement called Fluxus, and it was all about exploring art which is, in a way, here today, gone tomorrow.
It's so kind of smooth.
If the art's ambitious, the building more than does it justice. The soaring lines and innovative brickwork dovetailing with Giles Gilbert Scott's original structure.
I think it's a triumph. I think it's much better than the same architect's work on the rest of the Tate, which I don't like. And it's a joy to see a building that isn't solid walls of glass. You see it surrounded by these blocks of glass flats, and I think they're a disaster in London terms. The surface of this thing is so interesting. It's very unusual because it's brick. This is a skin over a concrete frame. Also, it goes into the brickwork of the Giles Gilbert Scott power station and sort of addresses it. The interior is spectacular. And it's largely because of the unusual shape of the building, which actually is not purely decorative. It gives a good spatial movement inside the building. And the light is extraordinary because you've got these ribbon windows which give you sort of fairly conventional light, but you've also got areas where the light comes through the brickwork, so you get a dappled effect.
A retreat then from the hard, hectic world outside. Here you can even have a snooze. It's all got terribly out of hand.
Well, tonight's main news here in Orlando, US investigators are trying to find out what motivated Omar Mateen to murder 49 people at a gay club here in the city, amid claims he might have had issues around his own sexual identity. His wife reportedly told federal agents that she tried to talk him out of carrying out the attack. And more survivors of the massacre have been describing what happened on what many of them have called the worst night of their lives. I went down to the vigil held here last night and spoke to some of them, including Ramses Tinoco, who was among those who escaped.
We were in the balcony. I was talking to the bartender. My friend was talking to two new girls that he just met, some nice people, you know, from New York City. And we just heard those shots, you know. So we told like music. The second shots, that's when people started screaming inside, you know, and there's some people coming out from the other door. And one of the bartenders was there, she got shot right in front of our faces. So that's when everybody started going down, you know, and the people coming out from the inside, there was blood everywhere. Even outside the patio, the shots keep constantly going, like unstoppable, you know. Screams everywhere, blood everywhere. The cops start shooting from outside to inside to the person that, you know, that was shooting at everybody.
And what did you see from the people running out?
Blood, basically blood. I didn't see parts, I just saw the blood coming out from people, you know. People screaming, it was very emotional. You know, people crying because they left somebody behind, they could not go back and get it. Everybody was just trying to save them. You know, just trying to save our life, just trying to get away, you know, have a chance or something. It's just so emotional, you know, so emotional. Once we got to the parking lot, there were just these people, their cops were coming from everywhere, you know. The shooter was still shooting, you can still hear the person shooting in there, so.
And do you know any of the people who lost their lives?
Yes. There's about 17 people that I know for sure. But
so you've seen their pictures?
I've seen their pictures. If I see the picture of somebody, I recognize them, you know. But I know there's a lot of my friends that got really, really injured and they're in the hospital right now in intensive care. Like you know, one of my best friends, Orlando Torres, was still there. You know, this morning he got released. You know, another one was Tony. You know, so there's all the other friends that I know, they're still there. You know, and we don't know, they're in very intensive care, so we don't even know if they're going to make it. I just thank God that, pray that they do.
How do you feel tonight?
I feel a little better that I'm here. You know, I feel a little better because I'm expressing myself. But at the same time, I have pain in my heart, you know, sorrow about all the deaths.
Are you angry?
No. I'm angry. I'm not angry, I'm disappointed. Disappointed that there can be so many evil people in the world. They just don't care about life, you know. It's one single life. 50 just like that, gone, you know. So that's what I'm disappointed. I'm glad that the person got killed, to be honest with you.
Well, President Obama has launched a ferocious attack on Donald Trump, accusing him of doing the terrorist work for them by focusing on Muslim immigrants. In his rhetoric, Kylie Morris, our Washington correspondent, is with me again. I mean, how does that move the dial?
Well, there's a very good chance it won't. But firstly, let's just think about what Obama has said. There was palpable anger, really, in his words. He accused Donald Trump of stereotyping Americans on religious grounds. He said this isn't the kind of America we want. I mean, this was meant to be an address updating people on the American campaign against ISIS, but really it was all about Donald Trump. He didn't name him, interestingly. He talked about him as the presumptive Republican candidate for president, and he also called him one of the politicians on Twitter, rather disparagingly. But here's the problem. In the past, whenever there have been these kinds of events, San Bernardino, Paris, Donald Trump always gets a bump in the polls. He does very well out of this. He makes mischief with the kind of Muslim language, the rhetoric, the anti-Muslim rhetoric he uses, and it pays off apparently for him with his supporters. There's every chance we could find ourselves there again.
And this story tonight, as we leave you, is perhaps more complicated than ever in terms of precisely what may have motivated this killer. That is all from us for tonight. We're back at 7 tomorrow with more. But until then, from Mass in Poland, from Kathy in Southampton, and from all of us here in Orlando, that is Channel 4 News. Have a very good evening.